I deployed the first time over there in 2003, first part of the year around February. And that was when I was still in the battalion in 20th Special Forces Group. We deployed a second time in 2005 when I was still in. And then I went back again on multiple occasions, probably over about a 10-year period as a civilian attached to various intelligence agencies.
Now, you served in the Vietnam conflict with the Navy. Were you still with the Navy when you went to Afghanistan?
No, no, that was a long story. I got out the first time in 68 and I was in the Navy. I got out then. Never intended to get back in the military again. Then when Desert Storm came up, I had several friends that got activated and sent in. And then that with National Guard and reserve units and so forth. So I got on the phone to a recruiter and called, and he said he could get me back in the Army the second time. So I reenlisted during Desert Storm, the first Kuwait operation in that Special Forces group. So I had to go back through all my trainings and everything as an E4.
Wow.
I had a PhD at the time,
Wow.
and which, by the way, helped me get back in because I was pretty old when I got back in. So they weren't going to let me get back in to start off with, but they took the PhD into consideration and they dropped off some of my age requirements. So I got back in and had to go through all my airborne trainings and all of the other air assault and special ops trainings and all that.
Did you go Special Forces in the Army because when you served in Vietnam, you did operations with the Navy SEALs? And so
Fields, yeah.
was that the
Yeah, that was
connection to
part
Special
of it.
Forces?
Yeah, that was part of it. I had some experience with that group of people, that attitude and so forth. And if, to tell you the truth, if I'd had to go back in a traditional unit, I probably wouldn't have gone back in because that would have been kind of boring, really. But because I had an opportunity to do that and go back in with the Special Forces, I went ahead and jumped at it.
So the obvious question that comes to mind is, you're in a pretty small class of people who
Yeah.
can, you served down with the Navy down in the Mekong Delta with Special
Mhm.
Forces there, the Vietnam conflict. Now you're in Afghanistan, uh, twice with Special Forces, and then multiple times after that with intelligence.
Yeah.
Um, so you're one of a very small number of people who can speak with some personal authority. Um, you can address the question, how are these conflicts similar? Obviously, you look at photos of the Mekong Delta, you look at photos of Afghanistan, we're looking at very, very different environments. And so and then the cultures are very different.
Yeah.
But, when you put these two conflicts together in your own mind and your experience in these two conflicts, are there some things that seem similar to you?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's quite a few similarities, believe it or not. That the the best, and I hate to say this because I may sound like I'm being a little disrespectful or whatever, but it's true. There was no control over any one of those theaters. We didn't have any command structure at all. I'm talking about strategically. I'm not talking about operationally, but strategically, we had no idea what we were doing there, what our end goal was. And because of that, we were basically spinning our wheels in both of those situations. And it wasn't funny, but that similarity is probably the most impacting one.
Are you saying that, like, for example, we imagine you're sitting sitting at a table with other sailors in the Mekong, you're sitting with other soldiers in Afghanistan in 2004, and somebody says, what's the end goal here? And in both cases, you're saying we don't really know what the end goal is here.
Nobody would have the slightest idea. As a matter of fact, let me tell you a little short story about Afghan now. In 2003, I was with a team down in Kandahar, down the southern part of Afghanistan. And in actuality, we were living in Mullah Muhammad Omar's old compound. You know, Omar was the Taliban commander. He formed the Taliban. We had run him out when we first launched the invasion of Afghanistan, and he was over in Pakistan somewhere hiding out. We went in and took over his compound, which was a really nice fortress type walled compound, except for the fact that we had blown up a good bit of it. But we took the livable area and turned it into a intelligence slash special operations operating base. And that's where we were living at the time. And we were launching operations out of that compound in the south when we were down south. We were sitting around our eating area table one day, and we had Armed Forces TV on our TV screens there. We were sitting and watching the invasion of Iraq. Now, all of the guys sitting at that table were what you would call shooters. They would go anywhere, under any conditions, to do anything. They just lived for that stuff. Okay? Every one of us looked at each other and said, what in the hell are we doing this for? Because we knew right then, when we went into Iraq, that was the end of our operations there. We lost funding, we lost assets. We were just, they took everything that we had and split it in half and sent the other half to Afghanistan or to Iraq. And we knew that was, there was just no reason for doing that at all.
Well, and are you saying that, the response was partly because we know resources are going to leave the project in Afghanistan and go to Iraq? Was that also, was it also doubt about the mission? I mean, if the mission is to get rid of the weapons of mass destruction, but the bigger, more idealistic mission was to help Iraq become a functioning model democracy in the Middle
Yeah,
East.
that was
Skepticism about that?
that was the greater mission, because to be honest with you, we all knew that the mass destruction end of it was just a talking point. We all knew that the ultimate objective in Iraq, if there was one, was helping them build a democracy. And I've told people this before, and I'll say it again over and over again. Afghans and Iraqis do not as a people want a democracy, because they understand that a democracy takes work and takes commitment. And those people are just trying to get by every day. They don't have extra time in the day. They don't have extra energy. They don't have what it takes to devote to building a democracy. They just don't physically have that. So when you go in there and tell them, we're going to give you the right to vote, go out and study up on these candidates that are running for office and be ready to go to the polls and elect who you want, they wouldn't have the slightest idea what you're talking about. We were on the ground in Afghanistan in 2006, I think it was, when they had that, or maybe in 5, I don't know. But it was when they had their first election, their first actual formal, legitimate democratic election. They went to the voting place, to the polls, and they took their index finger or their thumb and they put it on an ink pad.
Right.
And therefore they could not vote twice, because it would take them 2 or 3 days to get that crap off their fingers. Karzai was running against 2 or 3 other people, and most of them couldn't have even told you who was running against him. All they knew was Karzai. So they don't have it. Those people work their butts off 12, 14 hours a day just to put food on the table. They don't care about a democracy.
What I think I'm hearing then is that the soldiers you're with, and here we're talking about Afghanistan, I mean, it's early compared to how long that whole thing's going to go on.
Yeah,
US forces, NATO forces go into Afghanistan in 2001, 2003, and you get the news from Iraq, and the soldiers you're with, don't think the mission there is going to
they
succeed.
knew, yeah, they knew right off the bat that was a huge mistake. And they also knew, we also knew that that was going to hinder our operations
Yeah.
incredibly, and it did.
Well, so what is the mission then? So, you're with professional special forces. Are you able to say whether it's Green Beret or Rangers, or I don't know what your name?
It was Green Berets, what you would call Green Beret. See, in the Army, there are two National Guard Special Forces units. There's 19th Group out of Salt Lake City and 20th Group, which is the group I was with. And 19th Group would deploy for a year. We would deploy for a year, 19th for a year. And we would go over and hook up with our sister units, who are the regular Army units. Ours was 7th Group and 3rd Group. 19th, I think, was 5th and 10th, I believe.
So
But
for these Green Beret Special Forces soldiers you're with, then um, they're serious. That's why they're special forces.
oh yeah, yeah,
They are looking out for one another.
yeah.
A basic mission is to get home alive and to help the soldier next to me get home alive. Apart from that, it sounds like no one really believes this idea that there's going to be anything that Americans would recognize as freedom in Afghanistan, let alone enduring freedom. So what is the mission then for the soldiers you're with? 2003, and it may be the same in 2005. When you guys uh, head out on some operation, and we can talk about those. What is the mission? What's the goal?
Well, okay, that's a good question. In 2003, we didn't really have a mandate in the country. And I say we, America, didn't really have a mandate in the country. Number one, we didn't have a disarmament mandate. We didn't have the authority to disarm the public. So when we went over there in 2003, and this is just one little small factor, everybody above the age of 6 had an AK-47 slung over their shoulder, walking up and down the streets. I mean, there used to be an old joke that if a 10-year-old kid walked without an AK-47 over their shoulder, they were going to be walking lopsided. They wouldn't be able to keep their balance.
Right, yeah.
But I'm serious. Everybody had, see, when Russia left enough weapons there to arm every man, woman, and child in that country with 2 or 3 automatic weapons at least. And that's aside from all of the armored personnel carriers. They even left MiG jets over there.
Right.
So anyway, number one, we did not have a mandate to take people's weapons away from them. So we had to go and confront people, or not confront, but dialogue with people who were armed. You know, we would walk into a home or a hut and sit down and talk to people who had automatic weapons on their laps and grenades and shoulder fired rockets. I mean, we didn't have the authority to take that stuff away from them. Now we got that about 2004, because when we went back in 2005, it was a different situation then. But to start off with, we couldn't take people's weapons away from them. Now that's just one little aspect of it. But to further answer your question, in 2003, the Taliban and Al Qaeda had pretty much been pushed out of the country over into Pakistan. And they hadn't really gotten back in and gotten a foothold yet. So the bottom line is, we really didn't have a day-to-day fighting enemy. We really didn't go out and face a combat situation every day, because there was no enemy there, really. Now, they were beginning to reassert themselves, the Taliban, but they hadn't really done it in 2003. As a result of the non-presence of the Taliban, the local people, Northern Alliance people, were fighting each other because they wanted to be the ones on top. You know, they wanted to have the ultimate power. So Rashid Dostum, Mohammed Mahakik, Atta Muhammad, those were all of the three of the main Northern Alliance commanders. They each had their own little army. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. They even had their own uniforms. They had a command structure. They had all the weapons they could lay their hands on. And they each had a little army. And what their objective was at that time, because the Taliban wasn't there, their objective was to push the other two aside and be the top dog in the area. So what we did is we sort of split up our teams, and each one of us bonded with one of these guys. Our guy was Mohammed Mahakik, the people I was with. Another group would take Rashid Dostum. Another would take Atta Muhammad. And we would just sort of hang out with them all the time and kind of basically watch them, see what they were doing. And I mean, literally, we were up in Mazar Sharif to start off with, up north by the Uzbek border. We would go out during the day and do what we call presence patrols, just walk around, drive around, let people see us, you know, stop and talk to people. We shopped a lot. We bought things off the open market. We lived in the communities,
Yeah.
in safe houses in town. And we would just go out every day and just kind of ride around. But during the day, at some point, we would touch base with our guy. What's going on today? What are you doing? Why are you doing that? What's your objective? What are you trying to accomplish? That kind of thing. And we couldn't stop them. We couldn't redirect them or anything like that. If they were going to do something really dumb, we'd try to talk them out of it. But other than that, we were just watching them, you know? So we would literally be in town and pull up in a Hilux, you know, a little pickup truck with guys in the back and stuff. We'd pull up to a shop, a rug shop, and another truck would pull up alongside of us with Autumn's guys in it. And these two guys on these two trucks, you know, our guys were Marcus guys, they would get off and they'd look at each other with their weapons basically at cross arm weapons, you know, and we didn't know whether they were going to start shooting at each other or not. But you could tell the looks in their eyes. It was just pure hatred, you know.
Well,
So
let me pause you and ask you something. So early in the conflict, these forces with the Northern Alliance, they were together against the Taliban.
yeah, very much so.
Now
Very
the
much so.
now the Taliban is gone, and so now they're
Mm.
turning on each other.
Yeah, they wanted to, you know, it was natural because somebody was going to be the top dog up north. It was probably going to be Dostum because Dostum was the most powerful. And eventually he did wind up running everything up north. But they didn't know it at that time. And they just wanted to, each one of those commanders wanted to rule everything. So they were basically fighting each other. So
So there are two questions. I mean, then that come to my mind. My impression as an outsider looking in is that um, the culture of Afghanistan, one part of it is just fighting. That, you know, come springtime, we're going to fight with somebody, and if it's
yeah,
the Russians, we'll fight with them. If it's U.S. NATO forces, we'll fight with them. If none of them are here, we'll fight with each other. But we're going to be fighting someone. Is that an accurate assessment of just one of the things that's going on in that culture?
yeah, it's an accurate assessment, and there's a reason for that. There's a natural reason for it. If you look at the history of Afghanistan, they have gone from one invader to another, all the way back to Alexander. somebody has gone into Afghanistan to take it over, and the people have had to fight them off. So as far as a fighting culture, I mean, they haven't known anything else for generations.
Wow.
So when they don't have an enemy, the natural way to communicate with each other is fight. You know,
And
it's
the,
just natural.
yeah, and the other question that comes to my mind is, this guy's fighting to be top dog in the North. Um,
There wasn't any government up there at the time. That's another reason that, yeah, there's a big
yeah.
void there in terms of leadership.
So we hear people refer to Kabul as the capital of Afghanistan, but that implies the people of Afghanistan even have a conception of the nation of Afghanistan the way Canadians do. Canadians look at a map, they see
Yeah,
the country of Afghanistan and say, oh, there's the country of Afghanistan. But my sense is that the people inside Afghanistan most of them don't really have the conception of a nation called Afghanistan.
no, you're absolutely right. And, a village up in the mountains or whatever, northwest, southeast, whatever, would be located 20 kilometers from another village of a similar size. And those people would rarely ever even see each other, much less talk, communicate, or anything like that. So the idea of them bowing to Kabul or paying homage to the government in Kabul is just pretty ridiculous. I'll tell you something else too. That was one of the big problems that Russia had when Russia first went into Afghanistan. Their intention was to build a government, a communist government, but to build a government. And their intention from their point of view was an honorable one because they wanted to go in and establish schools, industries, give jobs to females, provide a level of autonomy, freedom, only a communist government.
Yeah.
And they did it in Kabul. But when they got 100 kilometers outside of Kabul, the people saw them as invaders. So because of that, all the people outside that 100-kilometer radius came against Russia. That's where Russia got its enemy, was
Sure.
from those people 100 miles outside the radius. People in the Kabul area would just as soon have let things rock along the way we're going because they had jobs, they had money, they had a decent life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
When you were there, did you see reminders of the Soviet era? You hear stories of, broken down Soviet trucks along the side of the road and that kind of thing.
oh yeah, gosh, yeah. It was, matter of fact, I always thought that one thing that would have been a real going industry in Afghanistan would have been metal salvage because, people could go around the country and salvage all of this Russian stuff that was left. Rashid Dostum, when we finally got the disarmament mandate, we went around and we started trying to discover these weapons caches all around the country. And the three leaders, they had stashed weapons away in caves. Well, when we finally got the disarmament mandate, we went around the country and tried to discover those caches and take the weapons out and give them to the Afghan National Army, which we were in the process of forming. And that we never finished all of that. Dostum had probably the largest number of caches around the country. He actually had at least one fully operational MiG jet that he had his men dig a big hole and drag it down into the hole and wrap it with Velcro or something, not Velcro, but that coating type material, and then cover it over with sand. And then later on, he negotiated a deal with Uzbekistan or Tajikistan or somebody to sell them that jet. And we intercepted it as he was pulling it out
You
and took
intercepted.
it away. Yeah,
Wow.
we took it away from him. But it was going to be a fully operational jet too. But
I mean, as you're saying that, I'm thinking,
hard to,
I don't know of I don't know of a case of the Viet Cong being that resourceful, although if we talk about their tunnel systems, but just the
mm,
resourcefulness of these folks who have very few resources, but are,
oh
I think,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
because they have very few resources, they're incredibly resourceful. How was the war different, if at all, between you go in the first time in 2003, go back in 2005? Um,
Yeah,
how had things changed
great
in
deal.
2005?
Changed very, very drastically and very rapidly. One of the greatest changes was the economics, and that was our fault. When we first went in there in 2003, we had to deal in American currency on the open market to get what we needed. So the American government actually shipped into Afghanistan full pallets of wrapped American currency, wrapped in, I mean, stacks of 50s or greater, uh, dollar bills, and a lot of ones too. But I mean, they shipped this massive, massive amounts of currency into Afghanistan. Now that was a really bad deal for one reason in particular. In the Afghan in Islam, asking for or accepting or offering a bribe of any kind is a really, really serious offense in Islam. And people just didn't do it. Before we went over there, nobody would, I mean, they'd be ostracized from their clan, from their family, everything, if they were caught doing something like that. Within 6 months after we went over there with all this money, everybody did it.
Was
So
bribing and it contributed to the
yeah,
cause of
bribing each
corruption.
other, and yeah,
Wow.
corruption just permeated the society very, very quickly because of all the money. And you got to think about it. If there's all of these stacks and stacks of money floating around, if your neighbor is grabbing a bunch of it and you're sitting over here and you're saying, no, me and my family are going to stick to the strict Islamic values, you're not going to do that, especially if you're poor,
Sure.
and your family's starving. You're not going to do that. You're going to go out and start grabbing as much. You're going to grab as fast as they do. So it was natural that that was going to happen. It was just another thing that we didn't foresee or we didn't, account for.
Now, when you're there with Special Forces 2003, 2005, are
Mhm.
you primarily involved in intelligence gathering, presence
Yeah.
patrols? Are you also, I mean, are you also getting into, are you experiencing ambushes, IEDs, firefights, that kind
Yeah.
of thing as well?
Nothing like Vietnam, nothing at all like Vietnam. But in 2003, I think I was over there for about 10 months. I was in Mazar Sharif for first little bit, and then I was down in Kandahar for the remaining of that tour. I think in 2003, we probably got into maybe half a dozen serious uh, combat situations, and they never lasted 30 minutes to an hour or so. This one in particular, a friend of mine got killed during that process, but it wasn't it was not a lot different from Vietnam. We would be going somewhere, we would be in an area that had more Taliban than we thought they were going to have, or we was just kind of surprised by the red folks that were around there that we didn't know were there, and all of a sudden we'd come under attack from behind rocks or behind walls. Generally, there'd be a shoulder-fired weapon involved with a lot of small arms fire. My buddy got killed with I think it was like a 50 caliber round, but it went through the back seat of a Humvee. He was sitting in the back, and it came through there were no doors on it. Came through and went underneath the vest in his side and out the other side. Killed him instantly. Now the guys that followed up on us, because see, by that time, the Taliban were beginning to move back into the country. So that combat situation were increasing. 2005, I was out of a FOB in Bagram in the center part, right by Kabul. And I didn't go out much then. I worked out of the FOB there most of the time. 2005, our guys were getting into more. Matter of fact, we lost 2 guys in 2005 then.
That second tour, you're doing more sort of intelligence work on the base.
Yeah.
Are you able to say what kind of, intelligence work you're doing, where the information is coming from, what kind of information you're looking for?
It was all human stuff. We did everything we did was just word of mouth information that we could get, just basically what's going on. We would go out in '03 and '05 actually, but in '05, like I said, I stayed back mostly, but in '03 and '05 both, we would just go out and hang with these guys and just pick up on their conversation, through our language, of course. And occasionally we would go out and talk to the clan elders. That's where you get most of your information, because you don't go out and interface with the younger guys. It's an insult to the older people there. And you definitely, obviously, don't talk to any of the women or anything like that. So what we would do in the evenings, we would go out and we would sit around these fireplaces or little fire pits and drink tea with the old guys and just talk to them about who was around the area, what these people were doing. We would drink opium tea. Have you ever heard of that, or what?
I heard of
Opium
huh?
opium tea is a tea that's made out of the leftovers from the poppy plants after the sap has been gotten out of it. They would take the bulbs and actually the top part of the plants, and they put them in a coffee grinder, and they grind them up, pour hot water over them, and then what came off was a little bit of opium infused, nasty tasting brew. So we'd sit around and drink that opium tea, and man, we'd get up from the campfires and get ready to head back. Everybody'd be about half drunk, and they'd say, "Well, I can't wait till we get ready to do the next."
These conferences.
But
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
and we just basically talk about, there was a little bit of during the disarmament, there was a little bit of under the table black market dealing in arms and some explosives, and we would need to try to keep up with who was doing that and what they were doing, and there was still a lot of Stinger missile parts over there then. There were still a lot of Stinger missiles, not well,
Stinger.
there were a few fully missile pulled, but there were still a lot of parts, and all of those parts had serial numbers. They were all, we had track of, as far as the numbers anyway, of all of that. So we were trying to track down a lot of that stuff.
These are
So that was part of it.
these are the shoulder Stinger missiles that the US supplied to help the
Yep.
Mujahideen against the Soviets.
That's actually what turned the tide of the war for them, because they could pop down those choppers and aircraft with those Stinger missiles, and you didn't have to be real smart to do it.
Right.
So, but when we left, after Russia left, we just left all that stuff over there, which was another brilliant idea. So we were trying to recover all that. So all of that was part of the conversation.
So you're there, and the policy of the United States. I mean, it's interesting. You say by 2003 the Taliban had been chased out. So the reason for going into Afghanistan in the first place, to kind of hit Al Qaeda and the Taliban, revenge for 9/11. I think we can say that had been accomplished. But then this other mission takes over: hearts and minds, nation building, enduring freedom.
Yeah.
And so, this is
And
what
nobody ever defined that. Nobody ever put parameters on it and defined it. It was all basically an illusion.
An illusion.
that we were going to create. It was a Disney World. We were going to build a Disney World over there, So
That's I want to ask you, when you're talking to these local leaders, and I don't know if warlords is the right word, but if you're talking to, warlords or something like warlords, you're talking to local leaders, what do they want? What, you know, are they just looking toward getting through tomorrow? Do they have any big, big goals in their minds? I mean, what are they up to?
well, they still had that economic environment where they just needed to get by from day to day. That was still there. But then all of a sudden you start throwing these little cherries in there and they start saying, oh, I want one of those, or I want a little bit of that. But they still knew that at the end of the day, they still had to get by. And occasionally one of their friends would get ultra rich and their families would have everything they could ever dream of. Because one of the things they did, by the way, we offered rewards, monetary rewards for anybody that would turn in bad guys. So if somebody over there had someone that they'd been feuding with for years, they would go to the closest military, U.S. military, and say, there's a bad guy, and I'll tell you all about him. And we would give him $200 or $300 or $1,000 or whatever the case might be. And he would go back, for 6 months, he'd be rich. Well, then somebody else would pick up on that and
It
just,
becomes a
it
racket.
was all just BS. I mean, serious
It
BS.
becomes a racket. As soon as you said the first sentence, we'll give you money if you tell us who the bad guys are. You know exactly where that's going. Bob hates Joe and figures
We
out,
weren't smart enough to know that to start off with. We weren't smart enough. And when we finally realized that it had gotten out of hand.
yeah,
So, and then from our standpoint, you were faced with well, how do you know when they're not telling you the truth? Or how do you know when they're lying to you about somebody? We were in Mazar-Sharif up north there. And Mazar-Sharif had a huge history in the war and in the nation of Afghanistan and everything. It was really, on a certain level, it was really pretty city and stuff like that. But anyway, we were living in a safe house up there, and we got word that there was a bomb maker that had come through town, and he was staying in a safe house in town with some of his uh, associates. And this was the word of mouth that we got from off the street. So this guy that had given us this information came in with a couple of photographs of this guy walking down the sidewalk. He had a camera, and he took a couple of photographs and had them developed and brought these photographs to us. So we had a picture of the guy. So we knew who he was from the information we were getting, and we knew where he was staying. He was staying in a little compound type mud house right out on the outskirts of this area. So we started looking for him, and 4 or 5 times we almost caught him, and we missed him. And then finally, just by happenstance, a couple of the guys were coming back from downtown, and they spotted him. He had a unique dress and feature and everything, so he was easy to spot. So they jumped out, grabbed him, threw a blanket over him, threw him in the back of the Humvee, and brought him back to the compound where we were staying, the safe house. So it was my responsibility to interrogate him. Okay. So I started talking to him, and I'm not the best interrogator in the world, and I didn't have the experience that a lot of my friends had, but I had a CIA agent with me. Each one of our teams had a CIA asset with us. So he was sitting in on the interrogation. And all the time I was talking to this guy, I was thinking, he's not a bad guy. He's not what this guy says he was. He drew us a map of the inside of the safe house where he had been living, a map of the inside of every room in the house. And we verified it because later on we raided the house, and it was perfectly accurate. He didn't lie to us about anything. Well, eventually we wound up turning him over to Bagram, and the intelligence assets at Bagram shipped him off to Guantanamo. And from what I found out, this was 2003, in 2005, he was still in Guantanamo. And to this day, I don't think he was a bad guy. I think it was all BS.
Someone who didn't like him targeted him.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that kind of stuff happened all the time, but still, there was enough little jewels here and there that just gave you a little bit of a doubt. And you couldn't just turn your back on that stuff. So we wound up, I guarantee you, we wound up rolling up a whole bunch of people who never should have been rolled up. And
And in the process, creating insurgents.
yeah, good point. Yeah. I mean, I can't verify that, but it makes makes sense that that's what would be the result.
Did you work with Afghan soldiers, the creation
Yeah,
of the Afghan National Army? Did you work with some of them?
yeah. Most of that was done by the infantry units. The infantry units that were deployed over had the role for the biggest part of training and setting up the Afghan National Army, the
Did you have
security
any
force.
confidence in them from what you saw?
No, they were good guys. They had they were like young kids anywhere. You pull them in, give them a uniform, give them a weapon. We're going to teach you how to defend the country and be the looked up to by all your fellow Afghans and got this job to do and stuff. And then we'd go out and some of them would follow through and some of them wouldn't. Some of them would chicken out and go home and stay home for a week or so. And then they'd come back again. Um, but some of them were pretty top notch. But still, I mean, just common sense tells you you can't build an army. I mean, our army's been around since what, the 1600s, 1700s or whatever. You can't build an army in a year, or whatever. So, but most of the infantry guys took care of all of that.
You can't build an army in a year. You can't build a democracy in a year. Yeah.
At the same time we were trying to build an army, we were trying to build a police force, we were trying to build a court system, we were trying to build a rule of law, we were trying to build a Congress, and we were trying to build, Afghanistan had two vice presidents. I think they still do. One of the first vice presidents was Rashid Dostum. He was one of our guys in 2003 that we used to go hang out with him and drink vodka because he always had some good Russian vodka. But he was one of the biggest thugs that the entire world ever produced. I mean, he would literally take people out and kill them if they offended him. He had 2 or 3 palaces around the country. He was very wealthy, and one of them was up in I can't remember the name of the city, but it's right north of Mazar Sharif, kind of a turquoise-looking palace type building. We went up and we hung out there with his second in command, a guy named Lul, L-U-L, and he was his best friend, best buddy, and he was a top commander of his army. So we went up, hung out with Lowell for a couple of days and just visited with him to maintain that contact. Well, I found out, then this was back 03, I found out in 05 that Lowell was getting a little bit too popular. So Dostum had him poisoned. You can't go into a country and build something that fast. And besides that, our leadership here didn't really have any real clear idea of what that was going to look like. When we initially went over there, I'm going to contradict myself for a second, but our last big battle there before 03 was in Tora Bora. And that's where bin Laden escaped along with his top people through Tora Bora. And that's where we made that final big push and pushed the Taliban out. And that was a pretty good battle there that lasted for several days. That was the last of it. From that point forward, we moved into no man's land. What are we going to do now? I don't know. let's sit around and play marbles for a few years and see what the outcome is.
So it sounds like you're implying that in retrospect, the wiser thing to do would have been after this battle, you're saying after, after the Taliban and Al Qaeda are gone, that's really the moment to say, okay, we've
We
responded
should
to
have left
9/11
then.
and we're out of here.
Yeah, yeah. But and there were a couple of things going on. Number one, we had Bush was 100% convinced that we could build this democracy and all that crap. But the other thing too, there was a whole bunch of people making a lot of money in Afghanistan then. You have no idea. Well, you probably do. The number of people who got ultra uber rich off of that operation. I mean, they were when I finally did my last trip over there, which I don't remember what year it was, but it was, after 2010 sometime. I don't remember exactly. But when I finally did my last trip over there, I left out of Kandahar and flew back to the States. There was a contractor who had gotten this huge grant to build an apartment complex outside of the Bagram airfield. No, the Kandahar airfield down in Kaf. He was building a huge upscale apartment complex outside of the Kandahar airfield. And there's nothing but rats living in that thing now. But this guy he walked away with him and all of his underlings walked away with more money than they'll ever be able to spend. So I
Wow.
mean, just ridiculous stupidity.
Were you involved much in hearts and minds kind of things, school building and
No,
other
no,
efforts to win folks over?
no, I didn't do, other than the simple fact of making friends with people and trying to, help them any way you can. We tried to we would call in engineers and build a well every once in a while. But even stuff like that, the culture, the people in the villages weren't really ready for stuff like that. And, it changed their life around and pit people against each other and just upset the norm to the extent it was too quick, too much. And, we were, I guess on that level, we were trying to do the right thing and trying to, in terms of hearts and minds, we were trying to do it down there. But, and we, take soccer balls and hand them out and play games with the kids and crap like that. But,
But I mean, so that's interesting because from the American perspective, building a well, we're helping these people. But you're
mhm.
saying that in that place, in that context, it leads to conflict and that's not really what people want. They didn't.
Who's going to be in charge of the water? Who gets the first, the best water, off the top, the coolest water? Who gets whose well is it? Can other people come in and use it? And again, the places where the women used to gather to get their water, um, is where they shared news with each other and stuff like that. Well, when we got water pumped into their closer to them, they don't do that. They don't see each other anymore. They lose that connectivity.
So you have this really rare advantage of personal knowledge of the Vietnam War, combat, personal knowledge of the conflict in Afghanistan, which also involved combat.
Mhm.
Um, as you look back on these two conflicts together, you put them together in your mind, and there are a lot of similarities, it seems.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um, what for you is the lesson? And as I say that, it almost feels pointless to talk about lessons because it seems like we're incapable of
No,
learning.
no, I understand.
But
We
but
call them AARs after action.
yeah,
Yeah.
action reports. But what would you, in your own mind at least, or when you're talking with students, you've got Vietnam, Afghanistan together. These are the ones you experienced. Um, what for you is is the lesson?
You know, I talk about this in class off and on. This is very philosophical. But the world has to have, there has to be certain countries in the world that take on the responsibility of adults, more or less, in a world full of kids. And, like when we were kids, I'm a lot older than you are, but it wasn't unusual for a parent, an adult, to see a couple of kids on the sidewalk fighting and grab them and pull them apart, or some big kid picking on a little kid and walk up to him, even if you didn't know him. The culture was such that it was okay for you as an adult to go up there and say, you need to stop that, because you weren't going to do anything bad. Everybody knew that because you were an adult, you were going to respond to that situation in a humane, honorable, correct way and keep a young kid from being picked on by a bigger kid. And so that was okay, it was acceptable. Well, the world is in a similar situation, whether we like it or not. There are all sorts of really evil countries or evil groups of people doing bad things to other people who can't defend themselves. The world has to have one or two of those adults to go up and say, you can't do that. We didn't do it during World War II when the Jews were first being massacred, when we should have, because I don't know, on a different level, maybe the leaders back during that point were saying, we can't do that, we're getting something we can't get out of.
Mm.
But somebody, we should have, in my mind anyway, in hindsight, stepped in and said, Germany, you can't do that. You can't kill those people like that. But today the world needs somebody like that, or at least one or two. NATO is supposed to do that, but they don't. But those people or those countries have to be everything that they display themselves to the rest of the world as. They have to be honorable. They have to be intelligent. They have to be morally upright. They have to be the good guys. And they have to step in and say, you can't do that. And if the other countries that are doing it say, screw you, we're going to do what we want to do, you have to have the willingness to say, okay, we're going to kick your ass for doing it. And if you do that 2 or 3 times and you do it right, and you don't stick around to loot the country or to let your rich people make money off the deal, then maybe the rest of the world will look at you as the adults in the room and settle for you walking up later on and saying, you can't do that. Maybe the rest of the world will look at you and say, hey, the adults say we can't do that, so we got to stop.